Hi everyone, I am Jeff Lawton. I'm going to look at a game from round 7 of the FIDE Candidates tournament played today, and it's between the outright leader Ian Nepomniatchi and his closest chaser Maxime Vachier-Lagrave of France. And MVL had the white pieces, so he opened with e4, e6, French defense, d4, d5, knight c3, bishop b4. Again, we have the Winawer, which Jan played it in the third round against Alexienko, a game that ended as a draw. And they follow this same opening line here: e5, c5, a3, bishop takes c3, bc3, knight e7, and again h4, which is what Kirill played against Jan. So we go queen c7, and this time MVL played h5, which is sort of quite logical, but it's not the main move. The main move was knight here, which is what Kirill played. So we got h6 to stop the pawn advancing, and now rook b1, which is quite a rare move, but the idea is to get out the way of the sort of potential cd4, cd4, and then queen here, which normally is check, attacking the rook. Then you've got to go bishop d2 and drop a pawn. So that's the reason behind rook b1, and it's also quite useful. Gives white the opportunity maybe to play this move later to open the center up a little bit. So we had b6, and now queen g4, which poses the question to black about how he's going to defend the g7 pawn. So Jan played rook g8, and now bishop to b5 check. And now rather than bishop d7, when one imagines bishop d3 would be the reply, Jan played king f8, which is a strange looking move, but it's not necessarily bad, because white has to spend more time retreating this, and now black can force off the white squared bishops, which is the main reason behind king f8. So we had bishop d3, otherwise c4 would block its retreat, and then bishop to a6, and now white opens up the position with dc5. We had bishop d3. You could play queen e5 for black, but then knight e2 is fine, and you don't get a chance to play to win a pawn with this because of bishop f4, and then there's two pieces will be attacking this, and there's only one defender, so white would win a piece. So black couldn't win a piece that way, but he could just play on otherwise. But in the game, he chose bishop takes d3, cd3, and then knight to d7. So both players were blitzing this out, so it's part of their preparation. And we had d4, b takes c5, and now queen d1. So up to here, they've both been thinking, but in this position, Jan had to think independently. He seemed to be out of his book prep, and he chose the move queen a5. And again, this was played quickly, fairly quickly, bishop to d2. And then we had rook b8, contesting the open b file, and now knight e2. So this was white's idea of playing queen d1, is to so that then the knight is not blocking the queen. And if the queen was stuck over here, it would now be sort of blocked out a little bit. Because one of white's ideas is to sort of play the queen to here and constantly sort of half threatening to play queen h7, especially if black decides to try and run his king across here. So that's one reason for the regrouping of white's pieces like this. And then Jan again had a very long think and played c4. And he played this after almost half an hour's thought, which is a long time. And bear in mind, he's a very fast player anyway. So, the French, although he's played the French before in the tournament, it's not really an opening he's used to. So perhaps he takes him longer to work out the strategic plans, possibly. But this move, it does seem very committal, and MVL, he criticised it after the game. He thought that White then, because it releases the tension that White's now got a free hand to play on the Queen's side. But on the other hand, it does make it easier for Black to, play the sort of intended king manoeuvre when he sort of get out of all difficulties. But he doesn't really have time for all this. White played castles, and then we had rook to b6, and now queen c2 rather. The constant idea of this, and also White's other plan is to play f4, and sort of intend to play f5. And White's other idea is a4 followed by bringing the bishop round. This is sort of like a dream scenario of what White would like, and then we can eliminate this. And then we can play f5, and then the knight's coming in, and we're threatening pawn takes pawn, and queen g6. This sort of thing is what White's hoping to get, and this would sort of be completely hopeless if White got all this. So in the game, first we had rook h8 to cover the h7 square from Jan, and now a4. So that's one of White's plans to do this, and then eventually chop that off and play f4, f5. So we had king e8, and now sort of nice move rook b4, which slows Black down on the queen's side and perhaps intends to double rooks. And then we had knight c6. So for example, if Black carries on with his idea, which he sort of seemed to be doing with the previous move of king d8, then White could play something like rook b1, and after king c7, then you sort of can carry on with the bishop maneuver. Black doubles, so it looks as if Black's getting somewhere now because he's developed his pieces and the king is safe. But White's in time for this strong maneuver to undermine the knight, because once this knight is forced away from the protection of f5, then White himself gets to play f4, f5, and it's just sort of very critical for Black after that. For example, if knight c6 to come away from the attack, we can takes, and then bishop d6 check, king c8, and now something like rook e1, which sort of the idea is to put the pressure on the e line in case Black plays f5. For example, if you play f5 now, sort of hoping for takes, and then something like knight takes. But instead of that, White can play g4, undermining the f5 square, which you're forced to take because the knight can't protect f5, and then queen g6, and then Black's position falls apart. White can just take these two, and the h pawn is much quicker than anything that Black's going to get on the queen's side. So king d8's a bit slow, so Jan played knight c6, threatening the rook, but that was brilliantly ignored by Maxime. So if Black, he now played his knight back to e7, which is sort of almost an admission of failure because the knight's just come from there and now gone back. But if he was to capture, then after cb4, the queen's got to go to a6, and then after b5, queen b7, White can then play bishop b4, and this sort of piercing diagonal coupled with f5, and then sort of crashing through on the king's side is sort of Black can't really do anything about this. The king's stuck in the centre. The knight doesn't really have a good square to go to, and simply f5 is coming. There's also knight c3 with possibilities of a5. For example, if you play try king d8 to sort of run that way, then we can go f5, king c8, and then chops on e6, chops back on e6, and then queen g6. And again, you sort of can't really protect the g7 square. Rook g8 doesn't help at all after simply a move like queen h7, and White can simply take on g7, h6, and the f pawn's too strong, and black, you know, so just got no counterplay, nothing's happening over on this side of the board. So in the game, Jan played knight e7, and then we had rook f to b1, f5, and now rook b5. So this sort of nice manoeuvring by Maxime, and he sort of now is in time to bring the bishop round here and undermine the knight's protection of f5. So we had queen a6, and now bishop to c1. So it looks like black's getting somewhere because these pieces are developed and the king's got to a safer position, but white is in time with the bishop a3 move, and black is unable to cover f5 with a piece, which is what he really wants to do. So we had rook f to b8, and now bishop takes e7, king takes e7, and now g4 before black has time to settle. So if black now plays rook f8 to protect f5, then something like knight g3 is strong, and after fg4 there's no choice but to play fg4, because otherwise you can't stop this. And after f takes, rook b6, ab6, f5, this is very strong for white. If you play ef5, then we can play knight f5. Just as an example, king f7, then e6 would crash through. Takes, rook e1, king f6, and now knight h6 wins, followed by queen g6. There's no answer to that. So in the game, Jan played rook b5, ab5, rook b5, and now g takes f5, rook b1, queen b1, he takes f5, and now knight g3. He wants to improve the position of the knight and take on f5 with his knight. And the black knight is a lot worse than white's. So we had queen to b6, and we had knight f5 check, king f8, and now a nice move, queen a1, sort of intending to bring the queen in this way. So apart from white's got, it's got the better of the pawn structure. This pawn here is weak, and the white queen is much stronger. And this white knight actually does a good job of protecting its own king. And on top of that, the black knight doesn't really have it's just not well placed here. E6 would be a much better square, but it's not able to get there. So we had queen to e6 trying to defend and attack the white king. If he tries pushing his own pawn, then there's knight e3 targeting the weak pawn. And after queen b5, we can play queen a3, king to g8, queen to d6, and after check, king f2. White is white's just sort of easily winning this now because d5 is about to fall. So, and also the e6 pawn can advance. So we had queen e6 instead, and now the knight came to g3 to cover its king. And just as a reminder, a knight does a fantastic job of shielding a king from queen checks. So after, say, queen g4 that was played in the game, king g2, there's just no more knight checks. The knight's covering the e2 square. There's no other squares to check. It's quite remarkable how a knight can do that, but that's what seems to be the case. And now we had queen f4. So if he tried to move g6, then we've got queen a3 check, king e8, and now queen d6 is very strong, and there's no time now. Well, I mean, there's nothing else you can do because hg6 is coming. But if black plays gh5, there's e6, knight b6, f5, and now after h4, we can play check, king e7, queen c7, king e8, and then queen f7 followed by e7, and queen's the pawn. And if instead in that line, if after g6, queen a3, king e8, queen d6, gh5, e6, we can just check the other black moves apart from knight b6. You could play knight to f6, for example, but then there's queen b8, king e7, and now there's the sort of nice move that MVL pointed out in the interview. So king e8 runs into queen f7 followed by e7, winning a piece. And if instead king e6, there's a rather beautiful move f5, and there's no escape square, sorry, for the king, and then black loses the queen. So g6 doesn't work. So we have queen f4, queen a7, and now king e7. If black goes passive to try and hold everything, then white, it's too passive for one thing, but after queen check, king e7, otherwise queen d5 happens, and then after queen a3, king e8, now the king's on a worse square, queen d6 is threatening e6, which more or less forces knight f8, then we can do something like queen b8 check, king e7, queen c7, king to e8, queen c6 check, king e7, and knight f5 would win the black queen. So instead we had king e7, and now white manoeuvres the queen in, queen to d6, and now it's not possible to protect d5. So Jan desperately tried g5, hg6, h5, but g7, and in this position Ian Nepomniatchi resigned the game to Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, because if he plays queen g5 to stop g7, then we can just play queen f8 check followed by queens or knight takes, and we're simply a piece up and winning. So a really instructive game against the Winawer, which I think it's a lot harder than it appeared. It sort of slightly looks easy on the surface, but it required a lot of well-timed moves, which Maxime played as a wonderful display, and a very tough loss for Jan. And after that round, we now have MVL and Jan are now sharing the lead of a group on 3.5 points of 4 players, including Caruana, who's the highest rated player, and Ding and Alexienko are down on 2.5. And in the final, in the next round, we've got Nepo is playing Jury. Caruana is white against MVL, which gives Fabio a chance to sort of take down one of the leaders, and he's got white, so that's a big game. And then Alexienko is white against Grishuk, and Ding is white against Wang. So there is a chance, a very outside chance, that if all the 3.5 players win, then we'll have a 4-way tie at the top. So watch this space. Okay, thanks. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching.